Madam Chairman, Chairperson, ladies and gentlemen, I will keep my remarks brief. I don't have any presentation, so that is one thing not to look forward to. But I thought I will cover this point of the issue of cybersecurity and how it is to be addressed at the nation state level, so that it creates a safe, secure environment for all users, from a couple of perspectives which I will cover. Because unlike other issues between nation states or which are under negotiation, the kind of threats the world has seen, the nuclear, the chemical and other threats, this is much different from those threats, and it may not be amenable to similar approaches, but there is no denying that there is something which needs to be done. And from that point of view, I just thought I will start off with talking about the nature of the problem itself. So some of the recent developments in cyberspace are something which are creating a great deal of optimism, energy on one side, and a lot of apprehension on the security sides in particular. So I'm talking about the way the technologies of big data analytics as well as Internet of Things are coming on the horizon, which will multiply the issues manifold when we are not able to deal with the current level of issues itself. And obviously these technologies have great implications, great benefits for businesses everywhere, including governments' abilities to be of service to the citizens, their surveillance abilities, and also the kind of benefits it is going to give in terms of the economic growth. But in the way the in technologies are developing, the kind of protocols which are under development, the lack of standards in securing these new technologies is something which I think we'll continue to see increasingly. And the current efforts that we see in dealing with this problem of cybersecurity is, I think, is going to be severely strained because of that. When we look at new technologies, so Internet of Things, I have mentioned, artificial intelligence is being talked about as something which should not be developed, if one were to hear some of the respected scientists. But all these simultaneous changes in different areas of life are going to create something which may, like the whole phenomenon of climate change, become more and more incomprehensible in a singular dimension, and you'll need to have a different kind of approach and analysis. So if one were to look at the Internet of Things technology itself, it's already have predicted to have across the human population. So 6.4 billion things already connected in the current year, a rise of 30% from the last year, and will reach 20 billion by 2020. So these are the predictions which Gartner makes around this, and with these will come the generation of data. So the other day I heard a technologist saying that there was a time when a human being was just a record in a database. Now a human being will become a database herself or himself, and will generate so much complexity and so much of utilization of computing power that it will strain comprehension. So one of the survey states that organizations are investing in location-based services, wearable IT, and behavioral advertising or digital engagement. So roughly 1/3 organizations are already engaging in these technologies, and obviously these will result in highly invasive technologies. A lot of personal data will get generated. A lot of applications are in healthcare, and the kind of attack surface it will provide is something which needs to be looked at. It is also predicted that by 2018, 50% of business ethics violations will occur through improper use of big data analytics. So that is the trend which we'll see, where so much data will get generated that invariably it will create risks which are currently not visible. The World Economic Forum has actually developed a value at risk model for this, and as per their study, 90% of the companies admit that they are not sufficiently prepared to protect themselves against cyber risk. So when we are looking at the private sector, which uses technology in a manner which gives them the competitive advantage, and when they themselves admit that they are not fully prepared, how these technologies will continue to rise, escalate, and penetrate new areas of human activity, and how they will be dealt with is something again we'll need to ponder around. I'm giving these instances of the security trends because they bring in that urgency of what needs to be done, and problems are well known. There are various initiatives which are going on, as my previous speaker also mentioned, and they seem to be moving very slowly. The group of government experts met after 2 years, came up with the recommendations which are still at a concept level, and we need to really then go to next levels of actually implementing the framework on ground. Now, if one were to look at the sheer range of actors and the sheer range of attacks, so we are worried about critical infrastructure. Already the first kinetic attack has been reported from a East European country, and resulting in disruption of electric supply infrastructure. And if this were to become commoditized, it will to become a norm. It can generate a lot of disruption in the society. Now, if it were only state actors, as happens for other threats, nuclear in particular, and so on, it may be an easier problem to deal with because there are deterrences which are known, mutual assured destruction, and so on. But in cyberspace, when small actors, non-state actors, very agile actors can overtake the existing assumptions and defenses, we are faced with a situation where there will be non-attribution, and there will be kinetic attacks which may continue to become more and more serious with the experience these actors are gaining. As we know, the cyberspace is something which is by and large, as compared to even other traditional ways of attack, much more offense dominant. The attacker always has the advantage, but in a physical world there are only so many things which can happen. But in cyberspace, the attack surface is so large, and there are so many points of vulnerability that it is something which works in the favor of the attacker all the time. Now, it's also not a single point problem to solve. So it's not a treaty which is signed and then implemented and then monitored and then assurance acquired. It is something which requires many players. It requires frameworks to be evolved. It requires multiple stakeholders to act on the incentives that will get created out of those frameworks, and then it requires the technology also to play good, without which the countermeasures will not be adequate. Now, the standard approach has always been to the respective nations create necessary laws, promote reasonable security practices, develop capacity to manage incidents, and develop incident sharing mechanisms, and continuously use both the corporate and home users about cybersecurity. Now, that approach has in some of the best situations worked in some countries, but in many countries which are still struggling to just adopt the technology, the security countermeasures are much lagging behind. Of course, the famous examples are all been there. I mentioned about the East European country where electricity outage was there, but I think the kind of threat we saw in the OPM hack again it comes to mind, where there was clearly a state asset under attack. There was non-attribution till some actors got arrested, and it was said that they were the ones who had perpetrated it. And so we may see more of these kind of situations which will interfere with the whole process of international negotiation frameworking itself. We also have problems of supply chain security. Again, the way hardware devices and software is being written and delivered globally, the assurance around these the supply chain itself will also stain our comprehension. Now, we've seen the use of cyberspace by terrorists. The ISIS campaign has been remarkably very successful, and again, it's an example of a non-state actor really utilizing the infrastructure in a manner which very little is available as a countermeasure. Now, when we're looking at cybersecurity as an element of national security, the international regional effort seem good to take note of, but I would say these fall short of where we need to be today. Various codes of conduct have been proposed, and I think when we talk of regional initiatives, the ASEAN initiative has been particularly noteworthy in this part of the world. In 2003, ASEAN adopted the Singapore Declaration, which sought to create an ASEAN information infrastructure promoting interoperability, interconnectivity, security, and integrity of cyber systems. It has been operating the ASEAN Regional Forum, which conducts regular intersessional meetings on counterterrorism and transnational crime, which also discuss cybersecurity. Now, this is, I think, a good model, but ASEAN again is something which is specific to the region, and it's a good model to follow. But then the local geopolitics will always be a factor. The ITU as a UN body has launched its global cybersecurity agenda, and has kind of prescribed 5 strategic pillars: legal measures, technical and procedural measures, organizational structures, capacity building, and internal cooperation. This initiative has also not seen much of progress, though it started from the side of infrastructure and didn't make that did not cover the entire ground. NATO's efforts on creating a cyber warfare strategy have been well appreciated. We have seen WSIS also doing a good deal of work in this. I think the UN group of governmental experts is by far the most comprehensive effort in this direction, where the basic principles are being debated and are being discussed. So I think if it starts from having states having jurisdiction with the ICT infrastructure in their territory. So somebody I was talking to was mentioning about, I mean, this is a very common statement made that cyberspace has no boundaries, but his point was that all infrastructure constitutes cyberspace. So countries very much have jurisdiction, and it is not really fair to call cyberspace a borderless kind of a medium. So I think to that extent, this recognition of this principle that states have jurisdiction over ICT infrastructure in their territory is important. It also puts responsibility on the states to then do take adequate security measures to ensure that the infrastructure is not being put to abuse and misuse. The usual principles of settlement of disputes by peaceful means, non-intervention in internal affairs of other states are very much there. I think these merely strengthen what the current arrangement is, and come back to the point of identifying the malicious actors, whether they are cyber criminals or terrorists using internet, or non-state actors trying to disrupt, DDoS attacks and ransomware included. And then that comes to the state capacity of how they will be able to identify and act against these actors. To that extent, I would say the international framework around cybercrime investigation, attribution, forensics, and collaboration needs a much closer look, and has not really seen much attention from all the countries concerned. The Council of Europe Convention is very much there. However, it doesn't see traction in terms of at least that part of the internet, securing the internet, of at least criminalizing certain acts, cooperating on international criminal investigations. Needs to see much more activity and much more discussion than what we have seen so far. In this connection, there was an interesting study done by the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, as called upon by the General Assembly Resolution 65/230. So they have looked at the essential elements of framework dealing with cybercrime, and so obviously the criminalization of all cybercrime acts forms the initial definitional part of it. But they also talk of model provisions on investigative powers for electronic evidence, model provisions on jurisdiction, how jurisdiction will get decided, and how the electronic evidence will be gathered and processed and presented. It also talks of multilateral instrument on international cooperation regarding electronic evidence in criminal matters. So the current mechanism of multilateral mutual legal assistance treaty is not really working. As we know, the average time an Indian request takes from US runs into few months, and in cybercrime this mechanism has not proved very effective. So the UN ODC report also talked of a multilateral instrument which will be much more speedier in its response time, and it also talks of delivering enhanced technical assistance for prevention and combating of cybercrime in developing countries. Now we are talking of cyberspace, but the cyberspace at the periphery where it is connected to the each individual country is not really well serviced by these capabilities which are expected by all countries, and that is where the capacity building aspects comes in, and I don't know whether it will form part of the negotiations, but if we are expecting an arrangement which operates all across the world, we will need to clearly look at these capabilities at least most of the points of presence. So I think the task for India is pretty well cut out in terms of preparing to join the global framework. What kind of capacity building is required to be done here, what kind of ensuring that our strategic and economic interests are adequately addressed in the current trade negotiations and other negotiations, because India is in a particularly unique position of having the business outsourcing industry being hosted here, the kind of supply chain origins which are here, and so on. So we need to look at ensuring that the negotiations take that into account, and I think much more adoption of standards, frameworks, and skill building is what is required. So I think to summarize, the problem is serious. It is not getting addressed with the speed with which it is required to address, and then there are complexities in terms of capacity and interests which are there. So something which will envelop all this is what is needed of the